it's your boy Luke here for our DFS fades and sleepers for this week's Waste Management Phoenix Open. In this video, we're going to cover some of the guys being a little bit overhyped this week, my fades, and of course some of the diamonds in the rough, guys being overlooked by the masses, my sleeper picks. The goal here, of course, for some of these large field contests is to avoid the chalk that's going to end up busting, and of course to try and identify some of these diamonds in the rough, like a Tom Hoagie last week, like a Troy Merritt, that open up all of the money in some of these large field contests. Last week, our best sleeper pick, but really ended up being more of a core play by the end of the week, was Jordan Spieth. I saw him at low ownership, absolutely loved the play. Of course, the recent form wasn't there, but Jordan Spieth, much like a Dustin Johnson, no stranger to snapping out of bad form in a hurry. And we saw that at a golf course that he absolutely loves. Ended up firing an outright bet on him after the second round as well, so we were all so close to taking home all the monies last week. But overall, ended up being a great GPP play. I ended up getting 45% exposure to Jordan Spieth by the end of the week because of that burger withdrawal. Ended up being a great pick here in the video. So hopefully we can go ahead, pick one of those diamonds in the rough once again that are coming in at relatively low ownership. It can help you get some leverage for these large field contests. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it for this week. All right, guys, on the screen, you can see our projections, and we're going to go ahead and start off with our fades. And the first one going to be Patrick Cantlay at $10,700. You would expect him to come in a little bit lower owned after his Sunday collapse. Also looked very shaky on Saturday at Pebble Beach. And the week before that, at least the last time he was in contention, he also fell apart on a Sunday. So that's something that we've seen the last two times he's been in this situation, which I'm not willing to ignore, particularly in this star-studded of a field. We have guys like Jon Rahm, JT, Hovland, Spieth, Xander, Brooks, just studs the whole way down to the 8K range. You aren't going to get away with that. I mean, if you're not having your best stuff on Sunday, one of those guys is clearly going to overtake you. And the fact that the irons were the main problem Saturday and Sunday this weekend is the main reason for concern. On Saturday, he only ended up hitting 9 greens in regulation, and on Sunday only hit 10. That is not going to get it done. And I know that these are some of the largest greens on tour, the smallest greens on tour, so it makes sense that he missed a few more greens in regulation. The problem is, at this next golf tournament over at TPC Scottsdale, iron play is by far the most important stat. So when we have somebody that's struggling with something that I'm emphasizing so heavily this week, it's going to be hard for me to have any type of confidence in him. On top of that, pivots like a Justin Thomas, Jon Rahm even, or of course a Viktor Hovland are all safer plays, but in my opinion also the same type of upside. We've seen a lot of these other players close when it gets down to Sunday. I can't even remember the last time that Viktor Hovland threw anything away, and the guy's won 3 of his last 4 events, and we know how good of a closer Jon Rahm can be. So going to be pivoting elsewhere, particularly because he's coming in at 18.7% expected ownership. We'll go ahead and take a look at some of the recent form metrics, particularly over the last 24 measured rounds. You can see that off the tee, he's been his usual self. He's one of the more accurate players off the tee, which is for sure going to be helpful this week. The issue is he hasn't been gaining that much on approach. He's really started to slow down ever since the end of that 2021 season where he won that FedEx Cup, just gaining over 0.15 shots gained approach per round, which for an average player, somebody in the 6, 7K, or even 8K range, that would be a pretty solid number. But for the guys in the stud tier range, it is far below his peers. I mean, the only reason that Hovland's right here at 0.13 is because all 3 of those wins came at shot link events where you didn't have those stats. Whereas Cantlay's been playing shot link stat events for pretty much his entire start to this season and hasn't looked that good. Guys like Hideki gaining nearly half a stroke per round, JT nearly half a stroke per round, same thing with the Jon Rahm, or even down to this 9K range, studs like a Burns, Berger, Scheffler, all guys I would prefer, right? We want to see guys coming in with good recent form, particularly with their approach play, because it is by far the most consistent stat from week to week. Go ahead and take a look at some of the other metrics. He also hasn't been quite himself around the green. He's typically a much better player at getting up and down. And one thing we know about TPC Scottsdale, it's part of that Players Club Championship network where you have extremely difficult golf courses, hard raised greens, tons of undulation. It's hard to get up and down there. It's always a factor year in and year out. So for all those reasons, I am out on Patrick Cantlay. He's going to be a fade for me this week. Next up, we're going a little bit further down the board. We're going to have Russell Henley at $8,200. And while the course fit makes sense, he's a great iron player, also relatively accurate off the tee, which you either got to be accurate off the tee this week or long. Having both is really how you win this golf tournament. The issue is he's projected to be right around 20% owned. And if we go ahead and take a look at some of the shots gained metrics, particularly over these last 24 measured rounds, you're going to see why he's going to be chalk. But at the same time, we'll go ahead and deep dive into the stats to figure out why it might be slightly concerning. First and foremost, he's gaining strokes off the tee, which he pretty much always does. He's extremely accurate off the tee. But the reason why he's the chalk of the century this week is this shots gained approach number, right? Gaining nearly 3/4 of a stroke per round, which is great. But a majority of that was with his short wedges, right? He's a shorter hitter on tour. He's somebody who excels with an 8 or a 9 iron in his hand. Unfortunately, though, if we get him closer to that 3-4 iron range, he drops off significantly. If we take a look at some of these rankings over here, season-long rankings for a Russell Henley, you guys will get an idea of exactly what I'm talking about. First and foremost, driving distance, number 161 in the world. That's not ideal. The driving accuracy, like we said, an elite number 22 in the world. That is what we're looking for. You can see with the wedges, like I said, he is a stout player. That's really what he carries him in terms of his approach numbers. But the farther you get away from the hole, you go 78th, 75th, 95th, 79th out here from 200 yards, he becomes less and less elite. And one thing we know about TPC Scottsdale is to win this golf tournament, to find yourself in contention, you have to be able to take advantage of these risk-reward holes. You have to be willing to hit those 200-plus yard irons, the 150 to 175 range, that 175 to 200 range are all extremely vital. And unfortunately, even though he's been playing a ton of good golf, he's been a great approach player, he has not been great from these ranges. And this is more of a longer-term sample size. These are season-long rankings right here rather than it being for the last 24 measured rounds, which gives us a little bit of a more consistent idea of how these players are playing, right? When we're taking a look at just 20 rounds, that kind of thing, these bucket stats can have quite a bit of noise to them. They can be quite inaccurate at times, but when we give it a proper sample size, it's something that I like looking at here. In terms of some of the up and down stats, sand saves, he's number 125 on tour. Here at this golf course, there is a ton of bunkers. It has the 5th most bunkers of any course on tour. And like I said before, you're also dealing with raised surfaces, which means that the scrambling percentage, even though it's just right about average, compared to a lot of his peers, he's not quite as good. So Russell Henley just has a few things not working for him. You can see the putting actually hasn't been very good the closer he's been to the hole from 5 to 10 feet, or inside 5 feet, that type of thing. He hasn't been very good of a putter all year in general. So what we've seen of late over here, over the last 24 measured rounds, where he's gaining pretty significantly, 0.16 shots gained putting per round, that is well above his baseline. And that is good to see, but it's also concerning at the same time, given that he does have a lot of room for negative regression, for a few bad weeks in there to kind of normalize him back to where we normally see him. And if that ends up happening here with the lack of elite long iron ability, that's going to be an issue, right? We have guys priced around him like an Abraham Answer that are a great course fit for this week. A Harris English that is great with those long irons. He's extremely aggressive. He's longer off the tee than somebody like a Russell Henley. He's coming in with a third of the ownership. Or even Answer, who's coming in with significantly less ownership than somebody like a Russell Henley. I'd much rather pivot that way. Or even up to a Corey Connors, who's also coming in lower owned. He's longer off the tee, that same type of accuracy, the exact same type of iron play. And historically, they're similar putters, right? Russell Henley, he has those spike weeks, but he's right around neutral or a loser for his career. Corey Connors, right, a loser for his career, but in the other categories, from tee to green, he clearly outshines Russell Henley. And at this golf course, particularly TPC Scottsdale, we see a ton of really bad putters excel. I mean, Hideki's won twice. You have Brooks that's won twice. Kyle Stanley's one here. So I'd much rather go to the better ball striker than somebody that's a little bit of a better putter. So that's where we're going there. We're going to be pivoting elsewhere. I mean, at that type of ownership, he has to be a slam dunk play, somebody that you just absolutely love at this golf course to go ahead and roster. And that is just not the case for me this week. Lastly, our last phase is going to be Harold Varner III, coming off a win at the Saudi International. He's clearly going to be on cloud 9 after winning that golf tournament. It's his first real win, we'll say, internationally. I mean, he won the Australian Open back in the day, but that's a very weak field event. As opposed to this, where you had tons of studs like Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, Bubba Watson, who ended up out-dueling down the stretch. And Usually when you have somebody break through for the first time, and I'll say usually because this isn't always the case, but a majority of the time they end up coming out flat next week. You know, you're on that emotional high. You really put all of your energy that you can into that win. And when it's over with, sure, you feel a little bit relieved, but at the same time, you're extremely drained. And the fact of the matter is, it's not just that narrative. It's also the course fit here that really concerns me. If we take a look at over the last 24 measured rounds, one thing before we even dive into this here is we know he's a little bit of a shorter hitter. He's not really known for his distance off of the tee. Somebody is a little bit more accurate than long, which isn't really an issue. I mean, accuracy is something we're looking for at this golf course, but unfortunately he doesn't have the approach play to back it up, right? He's just over a neutral approach player over his last 24 measured rounds. And at TPC Scottsdale, that is nowhere near enough. We're looking for elite level ball strikers pretty much exclusively at this golf course. Anybody that's a loser on approach, I pretty much won't even consider for my lineups this week, let alone somebody who's not gaining at least 0.1 shots gained per round. I mean, I'm really looking for at least a quarter of a stroke gained per round for most of my picks this week. And while he has been a well-rounded player, you can see he's gaining across all four major statistical categories. A lot of that has been with the putter. A lot of that has been around the green. And at TPC Scottsdale, that is not how you vault yourself up the leaderboard. Like I said, it is with that ball striking. So the fact that he's coming in I was nearly 20% owned yesterday. I have him at 15.8% right now. I'm going to be a fade, particularly when guys like an Abraham Answer, just a little bit more expensive that we can pivot to, or even a Harris English, or we can pivot down to a Taylor Gooch, right, who arguably in better form than somebody like a Harold Varner III. We know that HV3 had the win last week, but Gooch won at the RSM Classic, has posted quite a few top 10s. He missed the cut at the Amex, which is why we get the price tag here that we have him at. But in terms of his ball striking, he's not the longest player off the tee. He's similarly accurate off the tee as somebody like a Harold Varner III. But if you take a look at these shots gained metrics, you'll see exactly why we prefer Gooch, gaining nearly half a stroke per round on approach, right? That's the separation between these two players. Around the green, very similar. Now, putting, sure. You can give an advantage there to HV3, but at TPC Scottsdale, we are looking for ball strikers, not good putters, which is why that I'm making that type of fade. He's also lower owned. Now let's go over to our sleeper picks, guys. The first sleeper for this week going to be Justin Thomas at $11,000. He's somebody who, honestly, I expected to be much higher owned than he is. I thought he was going to be right around 20% owned. But I guess in hindsight, right, you got Cantlay priced below him, even Hideki, who's won this twice. John Rahm, always going to get his fair amount of exposure. The issue is that Justin Thomas is a picture-perfect fit. I mean, the ball striking, the off-the-tee play, the around the green play, like when he gets himself out of trouble, there is no better at getting up and down than Justin Thomas. And if there's any golf course where you can get away with not being a great putter, like we've well documented on this channel this week, it is TPC Scottsdale. So this should be an ideal golf course for Justin Thomas. I mean, he looked absolutely fantastic at the Farmers Insurance Open. Obviously, ended up falling a little bit down the stretch, but that just came down to the putting, right? He couldn't make enough clutch putts on Saturday and Sunday to take home the golf tournament, but the ball striking was immaculate all week. And now he gets back to a golf course where he's played well at before. I mean, he loves this type of atmosphere. He's definitely one of like the people's type of golfers where when the energy gets up there, he feeds off of that. We saw that at the Players Championship. I got to see that firsthand. The crowd surrounding JT on Sunday were incredible. I mean, probably 10,000 people of the 15,000 were following JT. And for literally every good shot that he made, every putt he made down the stretch, climbing up that leaderboard, stealing that Players Championship essentially, it went bonkers. I mean, and every time he'd be rallying up the crowd. I mean, he loves this type of atmosphere. And I know it's narrative based. The narrative aside, right, he's the best course fit, at least in my opinion, in the field. The metrics don't necessarily bear that out just because the recent form hasn't really been Justin Thomas-like. But we saw him look really good at Kapalua, right? He ended up threatening that golf tournament for a bit. He looked really, really good last time out. So I'm going to be trying to ride that form. If he's anywhere near where we saw him in the past, this is very well a golf tournament he can win. He's gaining nearly half a stroke per round on approach. The off the tee play, he hasn't been nearly as good as he is historically, but last time out looked great, gained significantly off the tee. If he's back to his usual mold of gaining a ton of strokes off the tee, gaining a ton on approach, we know that he's one of the best players around the green. And this putting number right here, where he's a slight gainer with the putter, is extremely encouraging. I mean, we haven't seen that for years now. I mean, at least a year and a half, right? He hasn't been over this neutral number for quite some time. That's how well he's been putting of late. He's been able to get over that hump for the first time in a long time. And if that's going to be the case, if he's going to be gaining across all four major statistical categories, going to an environment that he absolutely loves. And he's also the lowest owned option of anybody in this elite tier range at just 13.1%. I'm going to have well over the field, 35%. We're looking at 2.5x the field in terms of the ownership. It's something that I am looking forward to getting to. I mean, that's going to be one of my favorite plays in the slate. Next up, we're going to go to Sam Burns, who is also inexplicably coming in with low ownership. I mean, just single digits right here. This is a ball striker's paradise. If there's one thing that Sam Burns can do, it's absolutely strike the crap out of the ball. He's $9,300, which is more than fair for this field. And in terms of the shots gained metrics, even with the missed cut last time out, still look great, right? He's gaining over a third of a stroke per round on approach, over a third of a stroke per round off the tee. Around the green, he's been much better of late than we've seen for most of his career. I think that's why, much like a Victor Hovland, why we've seen them really take their game to the next level. And the putting has been a little bit worse than it usually is. He's typically one of the best putters on the PGA Tour, and now we get him on these very weird greens. We don't see him very often on tour. Again, it's a mixture of Bermuda, bentgrass, and POA Trivolus, which is just weird. Again, we don't see it very often. But where do we see it? TPC Sawgrass. Burns has played pretty damn good at TPC Sawgrass. Innisbrook for the Valspar Championship. Oh, he has a top 5 and a win at that golf course in his 2 trips. And where else? At the American Express, where he missed the cut. So there's a little bit, of 2 things there, right? He missed the cut, but he was only playing there for one of the 3 rounds. So we can't really hold that against him. One of the 3 rounds at a place where he missed the cut, he didn't play well. And one thing to note is that his best round at the American Express was at PGA West, where you have these exact same type of greens. So overall, I really expect him to play well this week. He clearly likes this type of green surface. He's one of the best ball strikers in the world. He's got the distance we're looking for, that aggressive type of mindset where he's taking aim at every single pin. And the around the green play has been much better than usual of late. And that is a huge thing for Sam Burns. That really would have taken him out of play for me this week if he had been leading strokes around the green, because you're going to miss your fair share of greens here at TPC Scottsdale. You just have so much undulation on these greens. If you hit the wrong part of the green, you can not only be running off into a chipping area, but it's pretty much as good as missing a green altogether. So I really do like him this week, particularly at single-digit ownership. He's a great pivot off of Brooks, who I just don't like the recent form here, even though he's a past champion. I'm also off of Daniel Berger, who's coming in with an injury, right? We have no idea the type of form that he'll be in, whether he's actually going to be teeing it up this week. I'd rather go with the must-safer option into Sam Burns, who's coming in lower owned than Daniel Berger inexplicably as well. And now lastly, for our last sleeper pick this week, we're going to have Bubba Watson at $9,000. He's extremely overpriced. I mean, that was my first reaction looking to this price board, was Bubba Watson at $9,000. Are you kidding me? But he's coming off a second place finish. He absolutely loves this venue. He pretty much finishes in the top 15 every single year, and he's picture perfectly made for it. This is a ball striker's paradise and a shot maker's paradise. People that love to curve the ball, people that can use their creativity to hit shots into these greens, use some of the slopes to their advantage, have a ton of success. And that is exactly Bubba Watson's game. That's why he's won at the Masters. It's why he competes at some of these really tricky tracks like Riviera that we're going to see next week. And if he ends up having a really good performance this week, he could be chalk next week in the mid 9K range. Would not surprise me at all. He's just a perfect fit for these golf courses. He's also been extremely good over here on the West Coast. And we take a look at some of the putting stats on, again, some of those weird hybrid surfaces. He's been pretty decent for his career, particularly here at the Waste Management Open. So somebody over his last 24 measured rounds that's also been striping the ball. I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected this, but in terms of his off the tee play, gaining over a third of a stroke per round, the approach play hasn't been nearly as consistent as we'd hoped for. I mean, that's why the guy's not Bubba Watson of old, right? If he had that approach play still, he'd be putting up very similar numbers to some of these other 9 and 10K guys. But that's the thing with Bubba, right? He's that low-owned flyer type of play. You could say I'm at just 7.8% expected ownership right now. But when he figures out that iron play is going to compete. I mean, the guy has just electric ball striking. And at the Waste Management Open, that is exactly how you can compete. We know that the one huge weakness of his game is, of course, the putter. But at this golf course, it seems to cure all of those woes. Some of those guys that are a little bit cautious with the putter, like a Bubba Watson, who pretty much dies every single putt, with how fast the greens are here, it's pretty hard to die the putts, right? So the putts are actually going to get to the hole. So a lot of those putts that he's leaving short, maybe 2 to 3 inches right in the heart of the hole, are going to go in this week. And that's my theory for why some of these guys play so well, like a Hideki, like a Justin Thomas. These guys that just aren't very good putters in general, even a Brooks Koepka, right? Is because you get that extra rollout. And for some of the better putters on tour that are typically pretty aggressive, right, always giving themselves a chance to make putts, they're going to have some that run by 3 to 4 feet, and those are tough for anyone to make on a consistent basis. So that's my theory with the putting this week. Of course, he has elite course history here, coming in with great recent form. Again, a second place finish last week at the Saudi International, which frankly was also another course that really prioritizes ball striking. So that was great to see. I like the recent form. I like the course fit here. And of course, we like the low-owned pivot there as well. That's all for this week's fades and sleepers. Before you go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments, first off, who your biggest fade is for this week, and of course, second of all, who your biggest sleeper pick is. For me, my biggest sleeper going to be Justin Thomas, my biggest fade going to be Patrick Cantlay. Really just don't like the iron play we've seen from Cantlay. Justin Thomas seems to be completely being slept on this week. But go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you guys are thinking of. Of course, I also appreciate all of your support here on the channel. If you guys haven't already liked the video or subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys go ahead and do so. We're going to have prize picks content dropping this evening for the first round of this tournament. We're also going to have our weekly DFS live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time, covering the weather, my player pool, any last second updates to the modeling, of course, any of your live questions down in the chat. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that as well. We're going to have you completely covered for Showdown this weekend, for all the golf tournaments going forward on the schedule. Really looking forward to all of it, guys. So make sure you guys stop on by for all of that. Good luck with all of your lineups for this week, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.